This article is from Gizmodo.com. Paramount's Star Trek focus is back at the movies, including Star Trek 4. Again, Trek has lately been prioritizing its small screen presence on Paramount Plus, but that may be changing. The article is linked below if you want to check it out. Basically, it sounds like there's a possibility that another Kelvin timeline movie could be in the works. This has, of course, been rumored for 9 years now, since Star Trek Beyond came out back in 2016. It's hard to believe it's that long ago. That was the last film featuring the Kelvin timeline crew. Now, of course, as you know, this wouldn't be my preferred option for the future of the franchise, but on TV, Star Trek has been a bit of a mess. Moreover, with the exception of Star Trek Picard, it's all been largely prequel-based. I mean, for the most part. Even Lower Decks is based after Star Trek Nemesis, but quite a few years before Picard takes place. Even Star Trek Prodigy only takes place 5 years after Voyager gets home. So really only Star Trek Picard has driven the franchise forward in time into the 25th century era, which fans for the most part want to see. And even then, it was only really the third season of the show that did that in a meaningful way, which is why so many fans were excited at the prospect of Terry Matalas's Star Trek Legacy series, which unfortunately has not materialized, because at last the franchise appeared to be moving chronologically forward. Now, Star Trek Discovery started out as a prequel based before the original series and then moved into the 32nd century, which is also when Star Trek Starfleet Academy will be taking place. It has to be said, Discovery feels so divorced from the continuity of the rest of the franchise and the tone of the rest of the franchise that it kind of feels like its own separate and isolated universe. Now, obviously, Star Trek Strange New Worlds is a prequel, the Kelvin movies are prequels, and yes, Enterprise was also a prequel. But at this stage, I think fans want to see progression and not regression. Star Wars also fell into this backwards cycle of prequels over and over. And I think when a franchise starts to do this a lot, you can tell that the creatives in charge don't really know where to take the series next. So they just play around with canon. And they play around with the franchise history. You know, trying to fill in gaps in past events, explaining things, how things came to be, adding in bits of origin stories here and there, retconning stuff. And now it has to be said, it can be risky to do that, because the more you play around with the history of a long-running mythology, the more you open up the possibility of messing up continuity and undermining the backstories of characters. Changing the past can affect the future. And it's not to say that there aren't good prequels out there. I mean, I loved Star Trek Enterprise. Andor ended up being a great Star Wars series. Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, was probably the best film made in the modern age of Star Wars. But prequels, I think, should be rare things. You know, they should be sort of complementary to the main storyline which is moving forward. There's nothing worse than an aging franchise becoming like a sort of a tribute band to itself, riffing on its past glories and repaving over old ground with reboots and retcons. When the prequel thing has set into a franchise, it means that it's no longer building on new ideas and instead has become sort of risk averse, opting instead to focus on, member berries, nostalgia, and effectively suggesting that the best days of the franchise are quite literally behind it. I think the last thing that Star Trek needs is another prequel or another Kelvin timeline film in this case. 2016's Star Trek Beyond didn't make the money the studio had hoped it would, and I think it's crazy that no one else has come forward with a truly compelling and exciting new film idea. There's been a few others, but none of them that I think were better than the Kelvin films. And is this really the best that they have? Another J.J. Abrams Trek film? And I think what this suggests is that there's possibly a fear of trying something completely new or making a Trek film based on a brand new future 25th century crew, because that means starting from scratch with a new cast. But even though Beyond wasn't super successful and the Kelvin films were expensive to make, at least there's some audience knowledge of that cast, right? And so it's not a total hard restart from scratch. It's building from an existing foundation. I think that's what the studio thinks. So a new Kelvin film probably feels like a safer option for the studio. Furthermore, the Kelvin films at least have some big name movie actors in there, like Chris Pine and Simon Pegg and Zoe Saldana and Carl Urban. So that also has to be part of the appeal of doing another one of those films from the studio's perspective. There's obviously a difference between what might be right for Star Trek as a franchise from a storytelling perspective and what's commercially in the best interest of a film project from a business perspective. And the Kelvin timeline films at least have a built-in audience, and even Star Trek Beyond, despite being a flop at the box office all those years ago, has probably recouped a significant portion of its cost in merchandise, DVDs, and Blu-ray sales over the years. So, in that respect, a Kelvin film might feel like a safer bet than taking a gamble on a brand new cast and story for a Trek film. Of course, this is probably not what most fans want to hear, but it's just most likely the reality of the situation. And it's why this potential Kelvin timeline Star Trek 4 film has been rumored for so many years. But they just haven't got it off the ground yet because I think they've been waiting for something better, and something better has not come along. Anyway, I personally do think that it's time for another Trek film and for the TV project to be reevaluated. There's been way too much on television over the last few years anyway, and I think very few fans want a Starfleet Academy TV series, especially one based in the Discovery timeline. But that doesn't automatically mean that a Kelvin movie should be greenlit. So guys, I'm going to throw this one over to you. What do you want to see? If they're going to make a new film, what timeline do you want it set in? What would you like to see Star Trek do at the movies next? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and of course hit the notification bell to be notified of future updates. Share this video out there, hit that like button, take care, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.